Habertürk'ten herkese merhabalar. OECD Kritik Mineraller Forumu OECD İstanbul Merkezi'nde gerçekleştirildi. Açılış törenine OECD Genel Sekreteri Mathias Kormann, Ticaret Bakanı Ömer Bolat, Enerji ve Tabii Kaynaklar Bakanı Alparslan Bayraktar'ın da katıldığı törende aynı zamanda OECD tarafından hazırlanan Kritik Hammaddelere yönelik İhracat Kısıtlamaları Envanteri'nin 2026 Güncellemesi başlıklı çalışmasının lansmanı da gerçekleştirildi. Biz de etkinlik için Türkiye'ye gelen OECD Ticaret ve Tarım Direktörü Marion Jansen'le etkinliğin ve lansmanın ayrıntılarını konuşacağız. Thank you so much for joining us today. What does the decision to hold this forum in Istanbul in cooperation with Turkey tell us about Turkey's potential role, not just as a transit route, but also as a hub for critical minerals processing, logistics, and regional connectivity, including initiatives such as Middle Corridor?
Well, the potential of Turkey is immense, and that's why we as the OECD are very pleased to hold this Critical Minerals Forum here in Istanbul, in Turkey. And there are multiple reasons for this immense potential of Turkey. First, as you already mentioned, as a supplier of critical raw materials, both at the raw stage but also at the process stage, as a facilitator of transition, and third, we hope also in the financing of projects. And I will come back to this. When it comes to supply, Turkey is already an important supplier of certain critical raw materials. I'm thinking notably of borate, but you have reserves of rare earths that are rather important, so the potential is big to become an even important player. When it comes to logistics and as a route for transit, one only needs to look at history and at your geographical position to understand that Turkey is the bridge between Asia and Europe, between Africa and Europe and Africa and Asia. So absolutely a huge potential here in this space. I mentioned as the third element finance. At the OECD we host the so-called OECD arrangement for officially supported export credits. Turkey is a member of this arrangement, and we expect that this arrangement will in the future play an even bigger role for the financing of investment in critical raw materials.
And in the 2026 update of the inventory of export restrictions on critical raw materials released today, and what was the most striking finding for you? I mean, compared to previous years, was there any particular data point on rising protectionism that stood out?
Yeah, I would actually like to mention 3 points rather than just one. The first point is that the use of export restrictions continue to increase. Mm-hmm. So this is the 15th consecutive year, the 15th year in a row that the use of export restrictions on critical raw materials increases. That's not good news. The second point we noticed is that more and more countries use it. So the countries that were the ones that were most active in introducing new restrictions were countries that in the past, when we started collecting data in 2010, 2011, were not active in that space at all. So a wider use of export restrictions, that's also not good news for trade in critical raw materials. And the third element is that the most severe types of export restrictions are being used more and more. We see the steepest increase in the use of export prohibitions, so that is stopping access to critical raw materials, and that's also bad news for trade in critical raw materials and therefore for the resilience of supply chains.
And lastly, is it becoming harder for Europe and other economies to build resilient and diversified critical mineral supply chains? At this point, what do you see as the single most important policy step?
What has changed over recent years are two things. First, the markets for critical raw materials have become more and more concentrated, both at the raw material stage and at the processed stage. And second, as I already mentioned, more and more countries are willing to use export restrictions to stop access to critical raw materials. So all this is bad news for supply chain resilience. Our report that we launched today, or the inventory of export restrictions for critical raw materials, it shows that the EU has become less exposed over time to these export restrictions. So they have managed to diversify away from exposure, but diversify diversification remains a challenge. What needs to be done is to bring the different actors around investment projects together and to arrange both the financial side in order to invest in new investment projects, either in mining or at the processing stage, or both, of course, and from an OECD point of view, to work together in order to meet also the standards that OECD members expect to be applied along the supply chain for critical raw materials and their end use.
Thank you so much for joining us once again and answering these important questions.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.